Good evening and welcome to The Core, coming to you live from Channels Television Studios in Abuja, Nigeria. I am Kadria Ahmed. The recently concluded general elections have spawned mixed reactions both locally and internationally. Although observers have adjudged the elections to be generally credible and fair, they've acknowledged some of the serious electoral issues faced in many parts of the country. Since Nigeria transited back to democratic rule in 1999, the country has not had an election that is free of irregularities. Still, the consensus is that there has been steady progress and each election has been an improvement on the last. Not so with the 2019 elections, according to critics who point to the spectacular logistics failure of the Independent National Electoral Commission, which led to the postponement of the presidential polls just hours before they were due to open. We also saw in some cases worsening criminal electoral practices. For example, thugs who snatched ballot boxes went one step further and burned them. Violent altercations also took place between members of the security services and people thought to be armed political thugs. In Abomena town in Rivers State, for example, a soldier was killed and the confrontation also proved fatal for 6 of the alleged political thugs. Relationships are also said to be frosty between the army and the police, following an incident in which the army alleges that police officers attached to the Rivers State governor attacked and wounded 2 soldiers. So what can we do to bring an end to violence during elections and to improve the electoral process? How do we ensure elections, which are central to democracy, are fair, efficient and credible? How do we consign to the dustbin of history once and for all the challenges that continue to dog our elections and undermine our democracy? This and a few more questions on today's edition of The Core. First, an overview of the issues.
Please let me go home. I beg. I did transfer.
Nigerians responded massively to the campaigns, urging citizens to register and collect their permanent voters card so that they can take part in the 2019 general elections. A little over 84 million Nigerians registered to participate in the polls, but only 72.8 million of them collected their permanent voters card.
I want to vote to good leader. You know, concern me, say PDP or APC, or that one no concern me. Me, I need a good leader who will help my life, help my children, too.
Given the large number of cards collected and Nigerians' eagerness for the polls, it appeared citizens would come out in large numbers to vote, especially for the first set of polls to elect the president and members of the National Assembly. Alas, at 3 a.m. on the morning of February 16th, just 5 hours before the polls opened, the umpire announced a one-week postponement.
Following a careful review of the implementation of its logistics and operational plan and the determination to conduct free, fair and credible elections, the Commission came to the conclusion that proceeding with the election as scheduled is no longer feasible.
From the bus parks to the presidential villa, reactions trailed the postponement. Nigerians were not happy.
We are suffering today because of this postponement of elections.
You don't postpone elections, a few hours to the elections.
The Nigeria Civil Society Situation Room expresses disappointment and shock at the postponement of the polls in spite of assurances by the Independent National Electoral Commission, INEC, that everything was ready for these elections.
When the new voting date of February 23 arrived, the polls went ahead, but clearly the postponement had an impact as the turnout was dismal. Only 35% of registered voters turned up, which is less than 30 million of a possible 72.8 million. Some of the problems experienced in some areas included the late arrival of election materials and violence, leading to cancellation of elections in some polling units. the electoral body adopted a simultaneous accreditation and voting process. This raised some questions during the collation exercise.
So we noticed that accreditation and voting took place at the same time. But in the result presented in most of the states, like in FCT, almost 16,000 of voters accredited but did not vote. So
after the declaration of the winners in the presidential and National Assembly elections, Nigerians brace up for another round of elections, this time to elect state governors and members of the state's houses of assembly. In all, the Commission declared winners in the governorship elections in 22 states, with elections in 7 states declared inconclusive. The first time this has happened on such a scale in the country. The returning officers in Adamawa, Bauchi, Benue, Kano, Plateau and Sokoto states declared the governorship elections inconclusive, while the result in Rivers State was suspended. Consequently, the Commission declared it would hold supplementary elections on Saturday, 23rd March 2019 to conclude the process, and this went ahead as planned. March 23rd, a month after the conduct of the presidential election, the electoral body held supplementary elections in 18 states for 4 governorship seats, 41 state constituencies, 3 area council chairmanship seats, and 7 wards in the Federal Capital Territory. Due to litigations, the collation of results for Adamawa and Bauchi states were initially suspended, but later resolved. The electoral body also set April 2nd to begin the collation of results in the Rivers governorship election, which was initially disrupted by violence.
There will be resumption of collation and announcement of results. Resumption of collation and announcement of results. And this will take place between the 2nd to the 5th day of April 2019. And it will take place in Port Harcourt.
The challenges that trailed the previous elections appear not to have been addressed and reared their heads again during these supplementary elections. Undoubtedly, a lot of work needs to be done to clean up the election process in Nigeria to ensure citizens are not disenfranchised and free and fair polls take place. Some believe the starting point for these reforms can and should be the new Electoral Act.
Within a matter of weeks or 1 week, let us set up a crack team to amend the electoral law.
I'm joined by Idayat Hassan, Executive Director of the Center for Democracy. Next to her is Ahmed Issa, Program Officer with the social impact firm Reboot. And from the Independent National Electoral Commission, INEC, the Commissioner in charge of Information and Voter Education, Mr. Festus Okoye. Finally, Development Voter and Citizen Advocate Fakria Hashim. Thank you so much for joining me for this conversation. We also have a distinguished studio audience who will join the conversation as we progress. Thank you all for coming. Now, those of you at home can also take part in the conversation by sending your comments using the channel's Twitter handles, which is at Kedria Ahmed or at channels.com. Use the hashtag #NGTheCall. Let me start with you, Mr. Festus Okoye. Obviously, that video was a recap, if you like, of some of the things that happened in the last few months in, the start of the elections and now the tail end of the elections. You've sat back now a little bit. How do you think you performed as a body?
I believe that the Independent National Electoral Commission performed well within the context of the issues and dynamics of the electoral process. The first challenge we had was the challenge of postponement of the election. The Commission has comprehensively explained to the Nigerian people the reasons for the postponement. Nobody is happy about the postponement. The Commission duly apologized to the Nigerian people, but the choices before us were very clear. One, go ahead with the elections, bungle the elections, and then throw the country into crisis. Or accept responsibility for the postponement, apologize to the Nigerian people, and then go back to the field and do an election that will be acceptable to the Nigerian people.
Well, let's quickly talk about that before we move into the other issues.
Yes.
This is not the first time that elections have been postponed in Nigeria.
Yes.
Indeed, the former INEC chair, Tahiru Jega, postponed elections in 2015. The problem for many people was that your postponement came just hours before the opening of the polls.
Yes.
And there are many who find it difficult to believe that a responsible, effective body can actually not know at least a few, let's say 24 hours before the beginning of the polls. Wouldn't the writing be clear on the wall that you cannot carry out this election? So the 3 o'clock announcement in the morning didn't sort of make sense to a lot of Nigerians unless there's incompetence involved.
No, we believe that we had the capacity to conduct that particular election. The challenge we had was the challenge of a differential opening of polls in relation to polls opening maybe at 8 o'clock in certain parts of the country, opening at 11 in certain parts of the country, and opening at 12 in certain parts of the country. And we felt that if we did that, that it was going to create a problem that we could not solve. The second problem was that materials had arrived in certain parts of the country on time. And in certain parts of the country, materials were still proceeding, materials were still in transit. And we continued waiting to see whether all the materials will arrive at all the states to enable us conduct the elections. It was only around 12 midnight that it became very clear to us that proceeding with the election was not going to be feasible on account of some of these logistic issues which the chairman pointed out during his press conference. So for me, we postponed that particular election in the national interest and in the interest of everybody, because proceeding with the elections, having some elections open at 8 o'clock in some parts of the country, and then others we open around 11 and others we open around 12 noon, was going to create some level of imbalance and also some level of challenges that we couldn't handle.
Let me bring in Ms. Hassan here. So they basically are saying we did the right thing, we postponed elections so that we could have polls that were credible, that basically served Nigeria better. Did we have polls that served Nigeria better?
Did we? I think it's a chicken and egg argument, really, because one thing that became obvious with all the elections is that INEC got better with each of the elections. For the presidential elections, despite the poll postponement, we did not have early commencement of elections in most parts of the country. In fact, we couldn't record 50% commencement as at 8 o'clock when polls should have opened. But by the time we got to the 23, the March 9th and the 23 elections, of course, you will find that the deployment of logistics was quite better, which tells a story that we have a problem with project management as INEC, because this will not be the first time we are postponing polls. In 2011, we did that in the middle of voting in several parts of the country. In 2015, it was 6 weeks notice. And in 2019, the same happened. And despite the 1 week postponement, the management of logistics for the presidential elections was still poor.
So I'd like to bring you in, Ahmed Issa, from the point of view of an organization such as yours, which works on inclusion in governance. What was the impact of the way INEC conducted elections on sort of the process, particularly in relation to the sort of people that you'd like to see involved?
So if you look at the conduct of the elections, first the postponement caused apathy. There are a lot of young people who were voting for the first time who have never experienced cancellation of elections or postponement, sorry. And so for these young people, is a behavioral thing. The election has been cancelled, so they go back home 1 week later. Do they have the same motivation to go out and vote again? And for the Nigerian people, is an issue of an electoral body that had 4 years to prepare. It's good they came out to say we are sorry for what happened, but that excuse was not a 4 years excuse, because they had 4 years to prepare. And so for the Nigerian people who are eager to see a better country, And the starting point is a credible election. That wasn't an election that a lot of people would be or are satisfied with.
Before I bring in Fakria, who represents voters here and who's an advocate for citizens, I'd like to come back to you. Again, you know, you've apologized, it is true. You've said you've made mistakes, but I'm still struggling to understand, and I think a lot of Nigerians would actually like to hear directly, what were the issues that you could not plan for and resolve in 4 years that led to you cancelling elections 3 to 5 hours before they were to open? What were the issues?
Kadria, let me tell you something. It is a fallacy to assume that you prepare for elections in 4 years.
So is that the problem, that you didn't do what you were supposed to do? You should have been preparing and you didn't.
Let me tell you, because this, I've had this, oh, you have 4 years to prepare and you didn't get it right. You do not, if you look at the constitutional framework and the electoral framework, in terms of the management of sensitive issues and sensitive materials, you don't prepare for 4 years. Now, if you look at Section 35 of the Electoral Act, political parties have 45 days to elections to carry out substitution of candidates. The implication is that you cannot carry out procurement of sensitive materials before then. Because if you carry out procurement of sensitive materials before then you run the risk of a political party changing its candidates.
Surely what you cannot do is print, but you could get all your contractors lined up, you could get all the things ready so that all you're doing is literally going to press and printing.
I agree with you, but you will also know that because of the challenges of our electoral process, because of the trust issue in our electoral process, we hardly print our sensitive materials in the country. You print these sensitive materials to currency standard. You print these sensitive materials with color coding. You print these sensitive materials with all sorts of with all sorts of features that are hidden in it to prevent the faking of some of these materials, to prevent some people just photocopying these materials. So we print these materials to currency standard, and that also creates its own challenges. Now, not only that, we have a challenge of having to manage 91 political parties and almost 70-something of them having candidates in the election. The implication is that the resources are getting bigger and bigger. And when you bring these resources, you have to also throw them into the country, throw them into the central bank, and begin to distribute some of these resources. That creates its own logistic challenges. Secondly, you have to also look at the challenges we had with the judiciary. Up to 2 days to the election, we were still receiving and processing court orders. Nobody is asking, how come we were able to conduct elections in Zamfara when it was only on Thursday before the elections that the court said include the APC in the election?
Including me from Zamfara, we are asking.
Exactly. That is the point. The implication is that we also prepared because we had to print ballot papers with and ballot papers without to anticipate what the courts may likely do so that we don't run the risk of having to also postpone the elections and conducting it separately. So I think that there are several issues that accounts for why we had to postpone these elections. Some of them were due to our own making, but some of them were due to the fact that the law and the constitution gives us a small window within which to do certain things.
Okay, we will carry on this conversation, but we have to take a short break. Please don't go away.